Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Tucker Edmonds, and I am the Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture. As we begin the third season of Religion and we continue to find questions about religion and American culture at the center of public conversations and policy debates. The midterm elections are around the corner. There's a continued discussion about the relationship between the state, religion, and free exercise. And we are bombarded with how popular culture continues to contend with and wrestle with the categories of religion, spirituality, and culture. We believe that the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture is the ideal space, or one of the ideal spaces, to have this conversation. For over 30 years, we've been bringing together scholars and practitioners to engage religion and its relationship to the most important questions in our fields, on our campuses, and throughout society. This conversation is a monthly conversation that takes place the third Thursday of each month between leading academics, public thinkers, and practitioners in multiple fields, and that's hosted by this center that hopes to have critically important interventions at the center of it. And so I want to thank you all for joining us and thank our panelists for being here this afternoon. Today, our opening session of the third season is on religion and the future of the Religious Studies Department. This session is an opportunity for chairs of religious studies, for graduate directors, for faculty members, and innovative thinkers and practitioners of religious studies to think about the changing political context of the university, the humanities in particular, and the future of religious studies departments. This season, we plan to continue to look across the broader topics in our field, religious traditions, methods, and to invite thinkers and practitioners who are doing work on the leading edges of these discourses and interventions. We are also asking our thinkers to include with them, or to bring along with them, some teaching resources, syllabi and modules and videos that we will be able to use and upload when we upload the final version of this conversation. We hope that this will be helpful as you begin to think about and engage this topic and use it in a variety of places in and around your professional and personal lives. And so on this episode, we've asked the panelists to explore the ways that creative and boundary-pushing religious studies and humanities departments and thinkers have reimagined themselves in the last 10 years. We want them to discuss the benefits and the costs of new models in undergraduate and graduate education, and to suggest the possible futures for the humanities and religious studies in light of the changing and often erratic political context. I want to remind everyone who has joined us that throughout today's session, we are asking folks to submit their questions through the Q&A feature on Zoom. The chat feature might be open, but if you have a question that you want the panelists to answer, please submit that through the Q&A feature. This will enable our hosts and panelists to engage these questions as they facilitate this important conversation. Now let me introduce the host for today's conversation. I want to thank and introduce Dr. Rachel Wheeler, who is a professor of religious studies at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. She is currently serving as the chair of the Religious Studies Department and the director of the Pathway Minors Program in the School of Liberal Arts. Rachel is a leading and an award-winning scholar on missions and Native American Christianity in early America. And we could talk about all the work that she's done in that area. But for today's purpose, I really am just excited to talk about her current project in developing an app for faculty that helps to make the invisible work of academic service and domestic labor visible on academic CVs, in hopes of creating a more just climate for women faculty and faculty of color. Dr. Wheeler has written about this in the Washington Post, in the Chronicle for Higher Education, and many other venues. And I could go on and talk more about my chair and one of my colleagues, but I will turn this conversation over to Rachel, and she will introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Joseph, for that introduction. I haven't been in the Chronicle yet. I've been in Inside Higher Ed. I want to correct that. So thank you for that, the invitation to host this panel and for the introduction. I'm a newbie in the chairing business, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from my colleagues here on the panel and in the audience about how they are imagining and shaping religious studies to meet the current moment and to look toward the future. So Molly Bassett is Associate Professor and Chair in the Department of Religious Studies at Georgia State University, located in downtown Atlanta. Georgia State is home to 50,000 students, and the department has a major and I think the only standalone MA program in the country, with applied concentrations in nonprofit management, religion and aging, and chaplaincy. Molly also chairs the AAR's Applied Religious Studies Committee. Morgan Shipley is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Michigan State University, a large land grant university. He holds the Folio Chair in Spirituality, and he is also Associate Chair for Undergraduate Studies with primary responsibilities, including student outreach, recruitment, and curriculum planning. Kayla Wheeler is an Assistant Professor of Critical Ethnic and Black Studies at Xavier University, which is a Jesuit university in Cincinnati, Ohio. Her scholarship and teaching focus on Islam in America and contemporary African American religions. She's also the executive chair of the Center for the Study of Religion in the City Advisory Board at Morgan State University. So we've got a range of institutions here and a range of roles that we all hold that I think will lead to a fabulous discussion. So before we delve into our conversation, let me start by acknowledging the elephant in the room. It's hard not to be sent into a tailspin about the state of higher ed. If you spend any time at all reading the Chronicle, Inside Higher Ed, or even the Washington Post, which recently informed us that many humanities majors regret their choice. So many of us have probably experienced some degree of burnout ourselves during these pandemic years, and we've certainly witnessed as our colleagues and our students have struggled through the added stress of the pandemic. That said, and I've rarely been accused of being a Pollyanna, but I would like our conversation here to focus on what lies within the scope of our agency. I think we could spend this whole hour, we could spend days about the many, many, many challenges. And I would like to keep this conversation. I want to acknowledge those challenges, but I also want to explore the many creative, interesting ways that departments are meeting these challenges. And in a motto I've adopted, I've taught an American Studies PhD course in research methods a few times recently, and the motto I've adopted in trying to guide students toward their dissertation project is that they have to find something that sustains rather than drains them. So sustain, not drain becomes our motto. And this is how I'm approaching my term as chair, looking for ways that our department can adapt and thrive, but to make sure that we're doing so in ways that sustain us and don't lead us further down the path of burnout. So with that in mind, I wanted to kick off our discussion. So the first question I have kind of plays on the theme of the series, religion and I think that's not only a good title for a series, it's a good title, I think, that kind of captures what many religious studies departments are doing. That religious studies scholars are spending a good bit of time thinking about how our field connects with other things. So religious studies has long been interdisciplinary, but it seems that many departments and faculty are making different types of connections these days, partnering with communities, with other schools on campuses, and also looking to connect in new and different ways in our classrooms. So my first question to kick off to the panelists is, what is one way that your department has reimagined where and how religious studies positions itself? This might be in the classroom, in curriculum design, or in the community variously considered. So I'd like to kick it off first to Molly.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks to the Center and Joseph for inviting me to participate in the conversation today. And it's great to be here with Kayla and Morgan. Just before I answer the question, there are other standalone MA programs in the country, and the AR has convened faculty from those programs over time. So I wouldn't want any of my colleagues to think we're saying we have the corner on the standalone market. In terms of how our department has reimagined itself in the past 10 years, we have taken a decidedly applied approach. And that decision was really driven by watching student outcomes. We initially saw many of our majors graduate and go into careers in nonprofit. And then the AAR's Teagle study, those results came in almost 10 years ago now, also demonstrated that lots of religious studies majors were pursuing careers in nonprofit. And so we added a nonprofit concentration to our MA program. And that was the first step toward taking an applied approach. And we were able to embed a certificate in nonprofit management from the School of Policy Studies into our MA in a way that students can still complete the degree and the certificate in 2 years. So time to degree was a really important consideration for us. And so since then, we added a similar concentration in religion and aging. It embeds the gerontology certificate in the MA program. And now we are on the cusp of opening what might be the first pathway to chaplaincy at a non-sectarian institution in the US, which is really exciting. And in terms of our undergraduate curriculum, we've been pulling the threads of the MA program back into the undergraduate curriculum. So we teach a major course in the core, and that now has modules on religion and health and religion and aging, in addition to religion, race, and change, and so forth. So our next step in the process will be to update the major curriculum, but we've done sort of the background work of we wrote a new mission statement a couple of summers ago, program-wide learning objectives. So we're trying to align the pieces. And I think, that's something that I hope we return to in the conversation is how do programs develop an identity and a narrative, which makes it easier for chairs and faculty to be known to deans and to make cases on behalf of our departments. So I'll stop there so others can share how they reimagine their departments too.
I have one quick follow-up on that. Do those decisions derive also from faculty specialties?
Yes, yeah. So we, after we rewrote wrote a mission statement and agreed on program-wide learning objectives, the following fall, we revised the MA curriculum to do just that, to reflect the faculty research profiles and projects, and actually the classes we were already teaching. So we had requirements that were like Abrahamic, non-Abrahamic, pretty antiquated ways of thinking about the curriculum. And we've updated those. So now we have the study of religion, which captures like our pro seminar and courses on individual traditions. But then the other areas are religion, race, and change, religion, gender, and sexuality, and religion, health, and humanity. So yes.
Morgan, looks like you're ready to unmute there.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As with Molly, thank you, Joseph and the Center for having me here. Thank you, Kayla and Molly, for joining us, and Rachel for leading this conversation. I think it's really necessary and really important. A lot of what I'm going to say echoes, I think, what Molly says. I think on one level, as we think about what the value of a humanities degree is, what a value of a religious studies degree is, we have to actually think about what it's doing for our students and where they find themselves. And as a department, a little over a decade ago, we were thinking about where our students were finding themselves, where they were leading from, whether it was a minor or a major. Many of our students were finding their way into nonprofit or philanthropy or some type of community engaged work. And we felt that that was something that we were helping them discover, but often implicitly. There was no explicit type of, educational trajectory, but the conversations they were having in a classroom, the values, the virtues, the ways that they were thinking about community and responsibility were often leading these students to search out careers and professional paths that were, connected to thinking about community well-being, individual wellness, the way that we think about our connection to others. And so we willfully took a step back and asked, how could we help our students in that way? What could we provide to them to give them some skill sets as well that would further help them in the professional realm? So we don't have a graduate program, where I'll say something about that here in a second, but we do have an undergraduate program, and we established a concentration for our undergrad majors in nonprofit leadership. And it's really a sequence of courses, some specific courses on, the intricacies of nonprofits. So what does it mean to establish a nonprofit? What are the legal standards for it? How do we consider grant writing? How do you raise money? How do you construct a board? So real practical knowledge points that they could use, but also emphasizing experiential learning. right? Helping them find internships and avenues to explore this and gain some of that experience up front. So they felt that they were maybe more prepared to jump into those professional settings and not necessarily be alone in their search for how it manifests. And so that concentration is often what directs students into our department, right? Once they're in our department, they gain a whole lot of other values about what religious studies does. And I know one of the other questions kind of gestures to that, so I'll kind of leave that for now. But they're often drawn to it because they also see now that this notion that the humanities does not lend itself to a professional outlet is just untrue. And the humanities prepares us in really unique ways to engage a whole variety of professional settings. And specifically, one of those ones that is common, I think, to directly Molly's point, is the interest in nonprofit. And so giving them that skill set really helped direct students back into our department, to the point now where we are in the process of trying to establish a nonprofit certificate and master's program through our department as well. It's something that is in the works. We're hoping to have it launched within a year or two. And it's designed to do a couple things, designed to provide a further career pathway for students to carry on. So maybe they do their undergrad in 4 years and they can get a master's in their 5th year by already taking some of our courses, or to provide a certificate that professionals can use, whether that's for continuing education, whether that's for their own growth, or whether that's to find another avenue to do their work. And so it's reflecting the fact that the undergraduate experience is preparing them, but we know that people are finding or hoping to maybe find a different impetus for the professional work that they are doing. And we're trying to find a way to create space for them to explore that as well.
And one quick follow-up there, is the teaching about nonprofit founding and all that, is that done from within your department faculty, or that's partnered with other homes on campus?
Through our department. So we happen to have, kind of what your question to Molly in terms of the intentionality of hiring, we found ourselves with a department with a series of faculty who had background in nonprofit work. So we had a faculty member involved in Hillel. I come from a nonprofit in education and also in government transparency. We've had faculty members establish nonprofits. We've had faculty members involved in grant writing, and we saw that we had the skill set that was essentially being underused. And we could take really strong advantage of that. And one of the great impetuses of one of our faculty members who works on environment, and the amount of ways that environmental justice movements, climate movements are connected to both nonprofit concerns, but also kind of the lessons, the knowledge points, the understandings that religious studies provides. And so those things created a really unique dynamic that was a little bit more happenstance. But now that we have that there, we've been more intentional. So we had a faculty member who we hired in as a lawyer to help fill in some of those gaps. We have a faculty member whose background is specifically right now in nonprofit, so helping expand some of those technical skill sets like grant writing. So the initial push was faculty who found that interest reflected in the student interest. And now that we see that there, we're trying to be a little bit more intentional as we think about the concepts of our department.
Great. Thank you. And Kayla, you're in a little bit different situation than the others here, in that you're not located within a religious studies department, and you are also not in a public institution. You're in a specifically religious institution. So that likely makes the dynamics quite different. So where does the study of religion fit comfortably, and where do you find yourselves pushed? You're not within the theology department. So I'm curious if you could say a little bit there about how.
Yeah, so I'm actually a faculty associate in our theology department, which allows me to teach classes in the department and have my classes cross-listed. And one of the benefits of being at a religious institution is that our students are required to take theology classes. So the theology department has continued to be able to grow, hire new faculty members, both tenure track and contingent, as well as create new programs. So there's also here an emphasis on healthcare ethics. So there's a new healthcare ethics and spirituality minor that just launched this year that a number of my classes are cross-listed under. So my biggest struggle, being someone who has a PhD in religious studies but teaches outside of a religious studies department, is kind of getting buy-in from people to make them see that religious studies is something relevant and can be taught outside of a religious studies department. So my department has a really long name: race, intersectionality, gender, and sociology. And so it didn't take much convincing from my colleagues, but more so at the university level, of explaining how you can't talk about race and gender without including religion. and really making it centered, especially at a religious institution. And so most of my classes deal with race and gender and are very thematic. So looking at healing practices around the world or looking at contemporary Islam, things that are interest to our students because of their majors, as well as because of what's just happening in the media.
Great, thank you. It's interesting, there seems to be quite a convergence, and it's certainly true at IUPUI as well, this connection between religion and health. And some of that I think probably reflects, scholarly interest, student interest, but also the situation, the institutional situations. So one of the fastest growing majors in the School of Liberal Arts at IUPUI is medical humanities. And a number of our faculty have courses that fit into the curriculum of medical humanities. So one colleague, Professor Hayes, teaches religion and healing. My colleague David Craig teaches courses on public policy and healthcare policy. And he's also, another theme I'm hearing here is community engagement, religion and the communities around us. And he's been doing a lot of community engaged research in the local community. So I think it's very interesting compared to when I was an undergrad to see the extent to which religious studies are moving out in the institutions more broadly, into the communities and into the professions. I'm hearing here a move away from, not much emphasis on reproducing ourselves as academics, right? But empowering our students and helping our students in their professional goals through religious studies. So are there, and that kind of goes into my next contribution. Well, I'm not sure if we have more to say here, but how do we articulate what are the core contributions of religious studies? And how is that reflected in your curricula? Or is everybody moving away from the teaching of world religions and traditions-based curricula to more sort of problems-based teaching? So what's gained in this shift? Is anything lost in that shift? So Morgan, we'll start with.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I think it's that's a central question. I do think it probably speaks to all our unique experiences. And I saw in the Q&A too, where I think when you start seeing what's happening in religious studies departments and broader humanities departments, we are seeing a shift away from kind of the siloing of, an academic discourse to greater emphasis on the intersectionality, right? The way in which people are encountering religion or spirituality and how it impacts their engagement with their sense of self, with their sense of others, with the wellness of community, the well-being of the environment. And I think that at the curricular level, that leads to a tendency to rethink some of those older models of thinking about religion through the lens of the Abrahamic versus the non-Abrahamic, the East versus the West, and the way in which that is mired in colonial dialogue, the way that ignores issues of justice and ethics and wellness and well-being. And for many, when we talk about religion and spirituality, we are talking about, issues of wellness and well-being. We are thinking about how we come to understand our relationship to others. And so what I often tell people, the great value of religious studies education is it gives us a literacy to navigate the variety and the mass diversity of the world in which we live. And it helps us think about issues of equity and inclusivity. It helps us encounter people where they stand, and we have an idea of how their culture or their background or their religion might impact the way that they perceive medicine, or the way that they perceive dialogue, or the way that they perceive identity. And we therefore empower students to have that capacity in which they enter into the world in whatever professional setting there is. A lot of our students end up, like, let's say, in human resources. Why? Because human resources departments see students coming out with the capacity to navigate between these intersectional identity points. And I think it's important for a curriculum to start reflecting that. And so our department is actively undertaking that dynamic right now. We have an older model that really is kind of more of a traditions-based approach. And we have found that a class just called, let's say, Christianity may not appeal to students, right? But when you have a class on that is more thematic, right, it might draw in their interest, but through that thematic too, we can build in a lot of those intersectional conversations. We can start talking about gender and race and ethnicity in ways that might have been almost boxed out of the conversation because we are so concerned with trying to establish just pure religious literacy. and not thinking about kind of cross-dialogue literacy. So I think the great value is that skill set. And I think curricula is reflecting that, and ours is an ongoing process. I mean, we're doing it right now. We're rethinking how we want to center ourselves, how we want to meet students, I think, where they would like to be met, which is to give them certain skills to navigate this world that is only becoming smaller and smaller and more engaged with one another.
Thank you. Molly, do you have something to add there?
Yeah, thanks. In terms of like thinking about student expectations, I think that we still find that our students expect to learn about world religions. And we have gone back and forth as a faculty about whether to continue offering our most introductory level class is a thematic introduction to world religions, which sounds like you'll get tradition-based survey, but you don't. So students are flummoxed, and we work through that. But then we offer at the sophomore graduate level a survey of world religions, and we're on the brink of doing away with that. And I think that we're going to recuperate it in order to problematize what the students expect to learn, right? So when I teach that class, I start with indigenous religious traditions, which is my area of research. And then we look at why does that, upend what they expect to learn in a class called a survey of world religions. But in thinking too about, what religious studies programs offer students and some of the institutional pressures to do some of the things we've already discussed, like add professional programs to our degree programs. I think, when we look at things like NACE career competencies, we want to be careful in thinking about what we bring to those as scholars in religious studies, not just how can we add them to our syllabi. And so, we talk quite a bit about the things that Morgan was mentioning, and Kayla too, cultural competencies. How do we see equity, respond to situations of inequity? How do we approach people from, very basic things like in a professional setting, who to shake hands with and not, or what kind of food might you serve? These really basic questions too. So I think that, as we work to professionalize students who have interests in religions, the religious studies piece really does contribute a lot that our students wouldn't get if they took only the certificate in nonprofit management, for example. Mm-hmm. I think the value added is there, and that's something Morgan was describing too.
Kayla, do you want to speak to that question, or I could move on to our...
I would just say, I think there's a benefit of moving away from the traditional world religions model, because usually it means Christianity and the others. And so just getting away from that perspective, seeing all religions on equal footing and having these conversations, which are especially important for me at a Jesuit university, of the history and relationship between Christianity and colonialism, and even how we come up with these ideas about what counts as a religion and what gets to be seen as spirituality or something cool and different out there.
You just pointed to a question. I've seen a number of questions starting to pop up in the Q&A. A couple of them are speaking directly to spirituality. So let me encourage our other attendees out there, if you have questions, to put them in. I'll do one more round of questions here among our panelists, and then we'll open it up and we'll start taking some of the audience questions. So maybe I'll combine my last two. I had a question of like, what's the core challenge? I couldn't stay entirely away from from that end of things. But also, what's the greatest challenge you face? But how has your department faced some of those challenges? So what have you done that's been most rewarding or most positively impactful in influencing, and in what realm? Has it been in sort of student experience, in community engagement, in, however you define, what's one thing you can point to as a point of light that has come from the work you've done in your program? I can start with. Well, actually, maybe I'll start with that one. Something that I've seen our faculty do. One is building ties between the departments. So we've kind of grown in our engagement in other parts of the curriculum. And another, I can't say it's been. Well, I guess it's been a sort of serendipitous but that many of us in the department have turned towards community engaged scholarship of one sort or another. And now we're working to figure out ways that we can incorporate this more thoughtfully in our teaching. So often, many of us who have taught the traditional introduction to religions, many of us have incorporated site visits, and we've gone back again and again to some of the same communities that have been so welcoming of us. And so this year we applied, and we have funding for a student intern to work with us to try to build kind of a template of how to work with local communities so that we can be responsive and that we're not just constantly sending, taking our students to them, but also how can we help them with whatever their projects. And so I'm excited about this convergence of faculty interest and activity in community engaged research and ways that we can bring that to the students, that we can incorporate it into our teaching. So stay tuned, come back in a year or so, and hopefully we'll have more to share there. Molly?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to be a glass half full person, so I have to choose from among the points of light, as you said. I think that creating a department mission statement has led over the past couple of years, even during the pandemic, to an increased sense of community in the faculty, which is something I really appreciate. I'm coming up on the end of my second term as chair, and I'll have to write a narrative of what we've done in the past 3 years. And as I've been thinking about that, it's really that we as a faculty have done a lot together. Less that I've done things and more that we've done things. And I think that having a department identity that we've created together has contributed a lot to that, and also contributed to our ability to hire new colleagues who feel like they fit into the vision of what it is we're doing and where we're going, that clear articulation works to our benefit, which in turn helps us really support our students. And so, in recent history, we've sent some students to PhD programs. We have some alumni now in the professorate. We have alumni in, in med school and folks who've gone into professions, which is what our program is set up to help them do. And some of those people are here watching the panel today. So, I think I would say that feeling of community and cohesion around the identity of the department is a real point of light for me, especially given, that we, like all of you, have faced significant challenges in a state system at a public university with all that entails.
Kayla?
Yeah, so my biggest light probably comes from working with the Center for Religion and the city. We have gone through a number of changes over the past few months, partly thanks to a new loose grant that we have. And so we're really committed to building relationships with community organizations, religious institutions, and nonprofits to reimagine what urban religion looks like in relationship with people of color in urban areas. And one great thing that we've been able to do with the center is mentor students of color, both undergraduates and graduate students. And not just those who are in religious studies or theology departments, just people who are interested in religion and justice and anti-racism. And I think this is really important to give students a platform to think about how they can study and teach people and share information about religion outside of the academy, because not to bring in the gloom and doom, but most PhDs in religious studies, unfortunately, are not going to be getting tenure track positions. And if they do, many of them are going to end up like me, not in religious studies departments to begin with. So being able to give people the tools where they can continue their passion outside of a traditional academic model has been something really empowering for me.
And I'm afraid, Morgan, we've got so many great questions in the queue. I want to make sure we give our audience some time to get to those. So for first, one person I think we can be interesting to see in the chat. Our first question asks, or says that there's a new minor at Butler on religion and science and medicine. So it seems like, and they're interested in finding out how many other people are seeing this intersection of interests in their students. So maybe people could, if they're seeing that, could put a little note in the chat there. Certainly, it seems all of our institutions are seeing that convergence. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Here's a question about spirituality. So Morgan, this may be for you. So what does spirituality as how does it offer a way of moving in different directions than the study of religion? Does it speak differently? Does it offer a way?
I think it can, right? I think it depends on, the way that we're thinking about curriculum and the way that we define these terms. But I think if we consider the field over the last 15 or 20 years, and we see the rise in people who are positioning themselves as spiritual but not religious, or religious nuns, or the unaffiliated, individuals who are taking a step back away from religion, but really embracing spirituality, it forces us to ask what we mean by spirituality. What does this idea mean outside the context of specifically religious perspectives? What does it mean to talk about secular spirituality? And I think what that does is it opens up space to connect with a lot of the issues that we've shared already, and specifically that maybe Kayla is just referencing when it comes to issues of justice and equity and inclusivity. That spirituality is often positioned either religiously or secularly as for the pursuit of meaning, the pursuit of purpose, the sense of wellness and well-being for oneself and the relationship to others. And that opens up space for those intersections to occur, right? I think one of the things that we might lose, to go back to an earlier question, if we get rid of all traditions, is do we not then actually accurately help students understand how different traditions position themselves when it comes to belief and practice? Do we touch on them too much, or just kind of pull out these kind of core connecting points? At the same time, though, by moving away from strictly just tradition and thinking about something like spirituality, it allows us to talk about identity and community in ways that might lead to more inclusive understandings, and may also then help us think about the way that religious communities are involved in those conversations, but the way in which religious communities might also prevent those conversations from happening. And so I think spirituality is becoming a way of both gesturing towards the religious while also trying to open up other types of secular spaces to talk about meaning, purpose, wellness, well-being. And that's why I think you see both classes called religion or classes called spirituality are often like tethered to things, as that first question said, like to wellness and science or medicine or professional life. We see spirituality might maybe be a little bit more accessible because it doesn't come with the baggage of what religion means in terms of like a certain orientation of belief or belongingness to a specific community. And so I do think spirituality is important, but it can't come at the consequence of still studying and understanding what constitutes religion and how people come to understand it. But my position as a chair of spirituality, and that's exactly what we're trying to do, is to bring these conversations into spaces that often we're not having them, right? So to enter into those professional outlets and to think about to be a good professional also means to be a good human and to understand the needs and the perspectives of others. And how do we bridge that gap between what we're doing in the humanities and what we see in these professional settings? And rather than see them as siloed, might we not use our skill set to bring some of that to bear in those other fields?
And I'm seeing that the chat, it's not actually live. Joseph, I don't know if you can open that up so that people can put responses in there. But let me see if I can combine a few questions here. There's some really great ones. Some practical questions about how do you have ways of systematically collecting information from your students on what they're doing after graduation? So this might be a good one for Molly. And also kind of add on to that is what sorts of professional development opportunities do you provide for your students? So is there a specific class, extra workshops? Do you offer resources to them to help explore career paths?
Those are great questions. I wish that the system for central collection of information about graduating students was as robust at the MA level as it is at the BA level at Georgia State. We're left to do a lot of that work on our own at the department level. So I don't have, it's been a sort of do it ourselves approach. And I'd be happy to share more about that, but it would be long and rambling right now. In terms of professional development opportunities, students who graduate in the concentrations in our MA program and also majors have the option to take an internship course. And so they can find a placement, or we have a list of sort of popular placements. And then we created a new course about a year ago called Applied Religious Studies Projects, Papers, and Internships. And we're offering that right now every semester as a place to collect students who are either doing internships or want to develop a project, or make a seminar paper into, say, a writing sample for some other outlet.
I think a lot of us would like to see that syllabus.
Sure. So that class helps them explore career paths because the faculty teaching it brings professional networking opportunities into the class, alumni, the Career Center, et cetera. So that's one of the ways that we have made the professional development opportunities more robust.
Sort of a related question I'm seeing a few people ask is, how do you compensate faculty and students for this work, and how do you persuade administrators? How do you get them on board? Is there a secret sauce to drawing in others to this, to supporting these programs?
So I saw the question about supporting MA students, and we actually do fund, for the past few years, we've funded 100% of eligible students, which is not like tricky bureaucratic speak. It means that if you're eligible for merit-based funding, we've had enough to fund everyone. We also have students who use tuition assistant program because they're employees, or who use GSU 62, which is a program that opens education to people 62 and older in Georgia for free. Anyway, our funding model, though, is that MA students are graduate research assistants in their first year, and they watch a faculty member teach our intro course. They learn how to teach it in a seminar, and then in their second year, they're instructors of record. So it's something like a model in a PhD program might be, where students are TAs, but they are teaching smaller classes, 35 students instead of more, but they're teaching in order to receive tuition waiver and small stipend. In terms of compensating faculty, some of that is done directly in very small ways, but I think too that developing a program that meets the needs of the students at Georgia State is part of the compensation that we have. We're attracting students to the program who wouldn't apply to our program if we only offered a thesis and a non-thesis or a coursework intensive option. So like Morgan, we've built this program in response to student and faculty interests. So, I'm not sure what kind of compensation in terms of faculty compensation the question asker was wondering about, but there are some non-fiscal compensations, I suppose, that faculty receive because of the students that are in the program.
I think that's certainly an issue I've been attuned to, and newly especially attuned to as chair, wanting to do something, right? We've struggled with enrollment issues in the religious studies department here, and so we want to do something, right? But how do we work in a way that's not putting greater burdens and leading towards burnout? So how can we work smarter and hopefully build on the resources? Hopefully we can find that magic alignment between faculty interests, student interests, connections with other places on campus that can help to, sustain the department. Kayla, do you have?
I think I see what the questioner was trying to get to. I think there should be compensation for financial compensation for creating new classes. So I am a part of a brand new program. We were all hired. We were created as a form of reparations for our founder being a slaveholder. And so we had 3 new Black faculty members hired, and we had to create a whole new curriculum from scratch. And that was uncompensated labor. Our classes are filling, especially my religious studies classes. So I get this, I'm happy that I'm introducing more people to the field, but I do think it should be something that is compensated. I don't know what that kind of model would look like. One thing that we do try to do at religion, the study of religion in the city, is really do tracker hours for our directors, making sure they are compensated and have a helpful support staff. So we have been able to do that, but that's because we got a really, really generous grant. I'm not sure what you can do other than getting grants.
Morgan, do you have anything? Or anything from the questions? I've been trying, there's so many of them. I've been trying to sort of mush them together and extract.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Kayla's saying. I think it's unpaid labor specifically for minoritized or marginalized faculty members is often something that's kind of burdened upon them, and it's an unfair system. And so one of the things that as a department, but also as our college, the College of Arts and Letters, has really been actively rethinking about what we mean by service and what counts as service, and how service should be something that is not just kind of thrown in there as this other part that we do research and teaching, but actually can be as robust a part of our reviews of how financial decision making is made, but thinking about service in a different way, right? Not just service to the university, but really service to our students, to those that we are trying to prepare for these futures. And that often manifests in faculty taking on additional work. But if we recognize that and if we celebrate it, it's kind of changing the discourse around what we think is valuable within the university setting. It's not just the research production that's coming out, but what type of students are we preparing? What type of humans? What type of citizens? And how are we actively involved in those processes? And so our chair of our department, Amy Derogatis, for example, did a cross-cultural project on religious sounds. And much of that was driven by student work, where they were trained in resources, they were compensated as well, right? But also given, so both the compensation side, but also this great experience that helped them see kind of what we can do with religion, how we can engage in public aspect. And that was a choice. It was a very intentional choice to give students that opportunity. And I think it requires, though, a change in mentality. And that becomes more and more difficult as you emerge out of like the safety maybe of your department that sees that together, but then how might you convince administrators who maybe are not seeing it in the same light or thinking about compensation in the same way? So it's a challenge, but I think we just have to be really willful and intentional in the way that we are defining, the work that we're doing and what we mean by service and giving back to our students and how we are helping them, but also not burdening our faculty in a way that's unfair.
Yeah, and if I can just respond to, or contribute again, so for the applied religious studies course that we added, I did the service work of adding that to the curriculum, and then the colleague that teaches it, it's a small class, so there's a bit of a trade-off there. And I agree that faculty, when they're asked to develop courses that are for a specific targeted program like the one Kayla described, or that are outside what they would normally just want to add to the catalog because they want to teach the class in the future, compensating them is important. And we have been able to do that too. But like Kayla said, it's piecing together, it's sort of nickel and diming here and there from a grant or from, the department's foundation account. There really aren't institutional resources for that work. And I think it's in part because the expectation is that it's the kind of labor faculty will do without compensation. So, if there's not a call for it, then that expectation will continue.
Mm-hmm. thought has come, or question that I've had is what I'm curious what, I mean, my experience has certainly been that the path into religious studies has changed, right? I'm curious who, I think it's always been the case that religious studies majors are often sort of accidental majors, right? They're people, students, I've rarely met a student who says they come to college because, and they are set from day one on becoming a religious studies major. So we have to catch them. We have to have pipelines somewhere. So I'm curious what you found those pipelines to be, if they've shifted. Morgan, then Kayla, maybe?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, that's mostly our experience too, is that students come in with a desire to be part of a degree pathway that they see as leading directly to a profession. And I think what they come to encounter both in their experiences in the university, but where they also see people graduating and moving on, is there's not always a one-to-one scenario that this degree equals this type of job. Mm-hmm. And they find themselves asking questions about, why am I doing this? What am I attempting to pursue? How is this impacting who I am as an individual? And those questions sometimes lead them into our department. And once they're in our department, they come to see that those conversations can be very empowering. With that said, I think one of the ways that we've encouraged that is to try to be a very public-facing department, to really be out in the community, but also in the broader university sphere, and having conversations as it relates to, politics and what's happening in the current moment, to show that there's a certain this goes back to, I think, Joseph's opening remarks, that there's a certain resonance that religious studies brings to these conversations that you may not be able to have in other spaces. And I think students are searching for that. And when they see that happening, they're really encouraged to recognize that level of growth and that level of literacy will actually open up more doors for them. But it requires both a different, level of humility, both for us as faculty, but also for students at times, to quiet all those voices that people have had in the past about pursuing STEM or doing this, to see that there are other pathways towards professional development, professional outlets. But it's being really open as a department and trying to reach students where they are and respond to students. Why are you not encountering this? Why did you not do a statement about what's happening over here? Why are you not talking about this? So let's talk about that. Let's recognize our own limitations and then try to reach students as they want to be reached and have the conversations with them that they really want to have. And when they see that, I think they see themselves as part of a community, and they see themselves as part of a dialogue that they can actually participate in a meaningful way.
I think
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to hand it over to you. I was also going to tack on an additional question about where students are going after. So I'm curious how your students come to you and where they go.
So we market in race, intersectionality, gender, and sociology that we're a great second major to have. So we don't try to pretend that people are coming in wanting to do this. Most of our classes are gen ed classes, or they're cross-listed with a whole bunch of other departments. So students are usually taking a first class with us because they have to check off some kind of box. And so we know that this one class is our way to really draw them in. So we focus on a lot about showing them how our program can complement what they're already doing in the STEM field. The same thing with theology. Students are required to take theology classes already. So just giving them a way to see this as complementary and really essential for them being good lawyers or good doctors is to understand people as whole beings who are religious and non-religious, and what that might mean when you go out into the world. So a lot of our students do go on to med school, to law school. We have a very big social work program here that students start off at undergrad and then will continue on with the MA program here.
And I see a question that raises the fear, the things that have been in the news about the cutting of programs and the reallocation of faculty. And I would point to that. And the question is about we're struggling to develop a minor we are excited about, and that our students will be excited about because our decision making is deeply shaped by the cuts we've experienced. So there's a very practical question for small departments. This person has 2 faculty left in the department. There's a really interesting program at Hofstra, and I spoke to their chair there, Julie Byrne, recently, called Contemporary Issues religion and contemporary issues, or contemporary issues and religion. But basically it's kind of a scaled down major, a smaller number of classes, but then 3 courses or something can be in the complementary. So you might do religion and law, or religion and health. So the student might be a primary medical humanities student, or history, or whatever, or political science, right? And then if there are some courses, thematic courses within religion that fit with that, they could get a second major, or maybe in this case a minor, right, that could link in with that other program. And at IUPUI, we developed a thematic minor program, the Pathway Minors, that aim to do this, that aim to be not minors housed in one particular discipline, but that are thematically oriented, that play well with other majors across campus, not just in the liberal arts, but that basically give liberal arts perspectives on health and culture, on diversity is another one. So kind of strategically, with more and more emphasis on, diversity training and awareness. I think that's another, religious studies is a natural fit for contributing to those programs and initiatives. Or other panelists want to speak to? Like there's a bigger programs here, so fewer of us are working within the context of small departments. Another question here is about how can religious studies faculty advocate for adjuncts in higher education, given all the inequities inherent within the current system? This is a big one.
I think just being an advocate, recognizing that there are, various pathways to intellectual leadership and roles within the university, and recognizing that universities often rely on that type of labor in order to establish certain hierarchies, and to recognize that overtly, and to be willing to be an advocate on behalf of those faculty members that we see teaching a 4-4 or 5-5, or being pulled in here or being pulled there, and to be willing to speak to administrators about that, to bring those conversations to bear, as opposed to having it be a silent conversation. I think we need to be advocates for it. I don't have necessarily advice on how, except to not allow it to go unchecked and unspoken, that we need to work on behalf of those faculty members and maybe advocate alternative paths. So why does the tenure system have to be the only pathway that leads to a greater security in the university? Can there not be other pathways that bring that sense of security and belongingness? And to maybe move away from that model is the only model that we do see, which puts an unfair burden on, adjunct and fixed term faculty, and often faculty who are already feeling a sense of being marginalized from the system and from the institutions.
I would say unionize. And if you can't do that, share your resources. The majority of adjuncts are people of color. And I know a whole bunch of white tenured track and tenured faculty members who talk the talk, but don't necessarily walk the walk. So can you find a way to share your research money? Can you find a way to share your office? So many adjuncts don't even have offices, but are required to hold office hours across 4 or 5 different campuses. So there are little things you can do while you're trying to make institutional change, but you just have to be comfortable with maybe having to give up some of your privilege to make that happen.
I think wonderful points, Kayla. I think part of that too, right, is providing voting rights and privileges to these faculty members who have often been excised out of those decision making, so they see themselves and they're empowered in that way.
All right, well, we've reached the end of our hour here. I want to thank all of our panelists and Joseph for creating the series and asking us to participate. I did see one question in there asking if we could make this a regular, an annual conversation. I think I would certainly appreciate being kept up to date on what's going on out there in the world of religious studies departments. So there is, I would like to ask that you participate in a quick survey, and the link is in the chat. And it will be sent to you via email. The next series will be Religion and Horror, fittingly for October. And finally, in about a week, a recording of this will be available on YouTube. So stay tuned, and thank you all for participating and attending.